College sports remain a mammoth industry for the United States. College basketball may be the smaller, younger brother of college football, but it shouldn't be discounted how valuable entities like the March Madness are, generating $1.14 billion in revenue during 2022 alone. As of the 2021 season, Duke's men's basketball program earned a revenue of $47.7 million, while the entire top 25 earned an average of $26.1. So what happens when one of those programs puts the NCAA's reputation at risk, and more importantly, their earning potential in jeopardy? It's about time for a cover-up.
And the new scandal in the death of a college basketball player.
When Baylor forward Patrick Dennehy went missing on July 19, 2003, Coach Dave Bliss appeared distraught and addressed the media. At the time, it seemed genuine, and no one could see through his crocodile tears. The world would soon find out that Coach Dave Bliss led a targeted attempt to disparage Dennehy after his death, in order to cover up a whirlwind of illegal tuition payments made by Bliss himself, and the program's downright dysfunction.
Tell your own story, and then at the end of it, just add the fact that, in your case, you guys would call, and not have to go over and come over and go in the back room and do all that stuff.
And then there's the program at Baylor, a program evidently so corrupt, so vile, so corrosive.
The 2003 scandal is infamous, but has rightfully lost its attention due to more recent Baylor scandals ripping across headlines.
You actually find yourself contemplating what they say about cats, wishing they had 9 lives, just so it could suffer death 9 times over.
I think it's time to revisit one of college basketball's wildest stories, and the drugs, deception, and murder that are wrapped up within it. Our story begins during 2003 in the college city of Waco, Texas. By this time, the central Texas city had long lost its innocence. It was only 10 years removed from the historic Waco siege on David Koresh and the Branch Davidians. One of the surefire constants for locals was college sports. In fact, Baylor University was even founded 4 years before the first property was built in Waco, although it was originally in the nearby Independence, Texas. As of 2003, the Baylor men's basketball program was in a bit of a downturn. At that time, they were celebrating the 76th anniversary of the program, but had only one tournament appearance between 1950 and 2003, and only 25 seasons with a record of at least 500. By 2003, Coach Dave Bliss hadn't found much luck during his 4-year tenure, and had failed to qualify for the tournament or make any significant waves. Bliss was handed the reins at a peculiar time, taking over after a 5-year probation for recruiting violations had just concluded. More about that probation in a bit. Bliss was handed a mammoth $3 million contract, making the 3rd highest paid coach in the Big 12 at the time. Search committee member Jim Turner called Bliss a dream hire and made it clear he thought he was well worth the price tag. Funny thing about Turner is that he wasn't the AD at the time, but instead a powerful alumni and a former basketball team member. He also happened to be the CEO of Dr. Pepper. Whispers hint that Turner gave a sizable donation to the program to afford the contract, and conspiracy theorists suspect those funds were allocated from Dr. Pepper revenue. The one thing I've noticed about Waco and Baylor is that they are deeply proud of the fact that Dr. Pepper was local. It seemed to have an odd foothold on the campus. 2 years before Bliss was hired, it was named the official soda of the college. I'm sure that will have no negative repercussions. Along with Bliss's big contract came even bigger expectations.
Dave Bliss and his Lobos lead TCU.
Bliss had made some waves during his time in New Mexico before the Baylor hiring. Under his guidance, the Lobos went to 7 NCAA tournaments and notched 4 March Madness wins. A few big seasons in New Mexico was enough to help the public forget Bliss's history at the previous SMU, who left the program in 1988 after it smoldered to ashes from an illegal player payment scheme uncovered by NCAA investigations. It was proven that Bliss provided illegal compensation to star recruit John Koncak, who would go on to be the 5th overall pick in the 1985 draft. The only reason that both Bliss and the program skirted penalties from the scandal was the fact that the football program was already facing the death penalty. Lucky break. Elsewhere, the Baylor Bears men's basketball program found themselves in their own hot water. In a long and drawn-out investigation, it was determined that head coach Daryl Johnson oversaw and was aware of illegal recruitment tactics. Those tactics included sending potential recruits test answers in the mail. Although he was acquitted by the NCAA investigation, he was later sued for damages by Baylor. After Johnson finally admitted improprieties during his time as head coach, they dropped the suit in 1996. The only real murkiness around the Bliss era in New Mexico was when a journalist leaked aspects of his compensation, which had a few eye-raising line items. Some of these items that stand out include a country club membership, a $15,000 bonus for being competitive, and $68,000 from unreported private sources. It was also suspected that Bliss had a private deal with Converse in the range of $50,000 to ensure that himself and the Lobos wore Converse gear. Looking ahead to Dave Bliss's Baylor appointment, the school was just coming out of a 5-year self-imposed probation. With only one tournament appearance in the last 50 years, the pressure was on. Despite his style of basketball being branded as boring by previous local media, Bliss managed to stabilize the roster with a few recruits and transfers, leading the team to 19-12 and a small postseason run. One of the key transfers was a familiar face from New Mexico, Greg Davis, who followed Bliss to Baylor. As if it was crafted by writers, Bliss found himself facing his old team in New Mexico on March 14, 2001, with their season on the line. A win would help them advance to the next round of the NIT. A loss would end their season right there. After trimming a 12-point deficit in the second half, they found themselves up 71-68 with about 2 minutes left in the game. Baylor was unable to hold the lead and eventually lost the game 83-73. Bliss was disappointed, and the loss against his old home may have stung even more. Despite the loss, something likely caught his eye during the game, and as we'll find out, Bliss's career was tied to this player in a way he could never imagine. Coming off the bench for the Lobos was the 94th ranked recruit of 2000,
Patrick Dennehy
out of Santa Clara, California.
hasn't been heard from in 2 weeks. Authorities fear he may have been a victim of foul play.
We pick back up our story in the beginning of summer of 2003, as the Baylor men's basketball team effectively welcomes their new recruits to Waco. One recruit in particular was Harvey Thomas, a 6'8" forward who had just transferred from a JUCO, northern Oklahoma. Thomas was in high spirits when he came to Waco in May 2003. He was recently engaged, and after a rocky stint at Georgetown as a freshman that eventually led him transferring to a community college of all places, he finally had a shot at D1 basketball once again. Thomas lucked out even more by finding a place with two future teammates, Patrick Dennehy and Carlton Dotson. Thomas met Patrick during the fall of 2002 at a recruiting trip, where Pat even greeted Thomas at the airport and drove him around Waco. The two hit it off and shared aspirations of making Baylor a Big 12 powerhouse. For all of their hope and aspirations that season, their roommate and teammate, Carlton Dotson, may not have been so cheery. He had met with Bliss that past month and was told he could no longer be guaranteed in the team's plans, and his scholarship status was now in limbo. Bliss played loose and fast with the scholarships. When his official allocation ran out, he began to go into his own pockets. Bliss devised a way around the scholarship limit by making a deal with Patrick Dennehy to pay for his tuition and living expenses, which came out to about $17,000 at the time, and he also gave him the use of a Chevy Tahoe. The unit Bliss was renting out was apartment 11308 of the Sterling University Parks Apartments, which was the same place that Thomas, Dotson, and Dennehy were now staying. Dotson was only staying with Patrick because he happened to be married, but separated from his wife at the time, Melissa Kethley, who is now staying with her parents. Kethley claims that when the relationship was deteriorating, Dotson would grow highly paranoid when they partied. He suspected his wife of infidelity and even thought his other teammates were in on it. After countless instances of domestic abuse, some substantiated by third-party accounts, Melissa finally had enough and returned home to Sulphur Springs, Texas. Despite initially hitting it off, it seemed like tensions began to rise at apartment 11308. Dennehy claimed that Thomas was running up his cell phone bill and was responsible for the DVDs and clothing that went missing. Conversely, Dotson had purchased a pit bull off a couple in the country, but claimed he was unable to pay them because of friends who had been hanging around the apartment and stolen the money. Dotson claimed that when he confronted his friend, they waved a gun in his face, which coincides with the timeline of Dennehy kicking Thomas out of the sublet. Curiously enough, the couple that sold Dotson the pit bull would end up being woven into the story much deeper than anyone could imagine. Dotson and his wife Melissa drove 30 minutes out to Mount Calm to purchase the puppy, where they met Darren and Tammy Cox. The Coxes reminded Dotson of simple country families from his childhood, and they formed a makeshift bond. Darren would later recall that Dotson had a few strange incidents, like the time he asked if he knew anyone who needed drugs, since he had a friend coming into town, or the time that Melissa showed up with a black eye. One of the most severe occurrences was right after the couple visited the Coxes in April 2003. After Dotson shook Darren's hand goodbye, he told Melissa that he could see what the two of them would do if they were alone, and he used this as an excuse to batter her. This would be the last straw, and Melissa left for home shortly after. He had attempted to visit a psychiatrist, but failed to mention the dramatic mood swings and the voices that he occasionally heard. Dotson was only actually diagnosed with attention deficit disorder at the time, but the underlying symptoms seemed to fall closer in line with undiagnosed bipolar disorder, although this is just speculation. It's at this point where the truth begins to blur, and stories change based on who you ask. From the perspective of Patrick Dennehy, he had had enough with his new teammate Harvey Thomas, and asked him to leave the apartment. It had gotten to a point that Dennehy decided to change the locks, and his roommate at the time, Chris Turk, claims that Dennehy and Dotson were so paranoid they added an interior deadlock to the unit, requiring him to knock to get into his own apartment. After Patrick's Tahoe was broken into during early June, him and Dotson took to answering the door with loaded guns. Just a few days later, on June 7th, Dotson called his friend Darren Cox and asked if he had anywhere on the property where they could shoot guns. When Darren asked about the car break-in, they were convinced of the culprit. It was Harvey. On June 10th, they brought a .22 caliber rifle and 2 semi-automatic pistols to Darren's property. This was enough to raise concern with Cox, who pleaded with the two to go to the police. Then he claimed to be unable to do so because of an outstanding warrant for a seatbelt violation. When Cox pressed Dennehy to confide in a coach, he finally told assistant Rodney Belcher. He told the coaching staff that Thomas had robbed him and Dotson at gunpoint for a sum of money. Belcher confronted Harvey at his new apartment, where he denied any involvement. Harvey also claims that Bliss had confronted him about the issue, which puts a wrench into one of Bliss's major public talking points during the time, that he wasn't aware of any threats.
Had intense conversations, and all during the period when supposedly the alleged threats would have been made, we nowhere heard a threat or any sign of physical violence or anything along the line. Nothing was ever communicated.
On June 11th, their roommate Chris Turk left Waco. That same night, Dennehy spoke with his girlfriend, Jessica De La Rosa, and promised to call back later that night, but he never did. On the 12th, Dennehy was seen at summer school. That same day, Tammy Cox saw Dotson and Dennehy pull up to a Waco Taco Bell in Pat's Tahoe, seemingly fine. Curiously enough, Dotson called Cox and told him he had fled town to Maryland in order to avoid the heat. Apparently, they received a call from an outside party that enraged Patrick and caused him to fire off a round in the apartment. Two days later, Patrick calls up an old friend, Daniel, and invites him to a rap concert in Arlington. He tells him that Dottie is being threatened, but he has his back, and that he can't say much more on the phone. He reassured Daniel that they're after Dottie, not him. He finished the call by saying he was on his way. Dennehy would never show. The following day was Father's Day, and when Patrick failed to call home to his stepdad like he always would, his parents knew something was off. On the 16th, roommate Chris Turk comes back into town to find Dennehy's prized pit bulls, Nike and Callie, locked up in the bathroom, out of food, and the floor covered in filth. At this point, basketball staff believed that Dennehy's and Dotson's absences from school were nothing out of the ordinary. This is despite the fact that they'd been informed a week earlier that Dotson and Dennehy were robbed at gunpoint. As for Turk, who had previously had armed visitors stop by at night, there couldn't have been a bigger sign that something was amiss. Nonetheless, a missing persons report was only filed 3 days later by Patrick's parents, who were fed up with the lack of answers that the school administration seemed to have. On that same day, something strange happened with the Coxes. They apparently received a call from Dotson, who asked if they'd seen Patrick recently. Six days later, Dennehy's Tahoe was found at a shopping mall in Virginia Beach, with the plates removed. At this point, our story begins to take a dramatic turn. Two days before the Tahoe was found, a police informant from Delaware claimed to have come into contact with Dotson's cousin and a key piece of information. It was relayed that Dotson told his cousin in Maryland that he had shot and killed Dennehy during an argument while the two were shooting guns. On June 30th, an affidavit was unsealed and a search warrant was issued for Dennehy's home computer that would fail to turn up any clues. That same affidavit mentioned a police informant from Delaware. At this point, the public had began to directly implicate Dotson in the disappearance, with the affidavit details leaking to the press. While Dennehy was missing and the public looked for answers, more details about his past began to leak out. His previous transfer from New Mexico wasn't as simple as a playing time dispute. While under head coach Fran Fraschilla, he stormed out of a practice in anger. Yet the next day, the staff announced they were not disciplining Dennehy because of an undisclosed medical condition. They also announced he was now taking medication, but that there was a few flare-ups of the condition at times. Mental health was shrouded in such secrecy, it's hard to decipher what Pat was likely suffering from. Initial talking head arguments even tried to falsely suggest that this may have led Dennehy to a life of crime. Behind the scenes, Maryland police brought Dotson in to talk with investigators. He seemed distraught and to avoid talking about Patrick directly.
Patrick, he wants to please, everyone. He
would focus this interview on the alleged drug use at Baylor. He called assistant coach Abar Rouse a general, claiming players were selling drugs for him. On June 27th, the date of the interview, Rouse had been working with the program for less than a week.
Coach Abar is what I would call a general. Coach Abar has players selling cocaine for him. He had Dallas kids selling drugs for him. He had, Harvey's in the mix with him.
When police continued to press about Patrick, they caught Dotson in a minor slip-up when he referred to Patrick in the past tense. When asked about the last time he saw Patrick, Dotson's demeanor shifted, and he requested the interview end immediately.
When did you guys see Patrick?
Go ahead and stop this right here.
Are you wanting to stop this interview? Is that what you're telling me?
Yes, sir.
Dotson was driven back to his relative's house, but police clearly knew something was off. In a typical police move, they left the interrogation cameras on in between to see how he would act. When police left, Dotson would murmur under his breath. It was clear that he wasn't well.
Okay.
5 days after the Dotson interview, police showed up to the Baylor basketball offices. They were after Abar Rouse and wanted to question him. They asked if he was selling drugs through players on the team and if he would take a polygraph test. They had also asked if he'd threatened Patrick or Carlton. Abar had now only been with the program for 12 days. For a while, the investigation across Maryland and Texas seemed to stall. Dotson hired a lawyer, and it seemed like all of the details were locked with him. Everything was quiet until July 17th, when Dotson himself called local police and told them he needed to get in contact with the FBI. On July 17th, the FBI took this recorded statement from Dotson. It's clear that his mental state was quickly deteriorating by the nature of what he spoke about, and that he was possibly in the middle of a manic episode.
Mr. Carlton Dotson, do you understand that you're being recorded?
Yes.
Why do you want us to come pick you up? What did you come here to tell us?
There are many demonic spirits that are after me. There are things taking place that are unexplainable.
What kind of things?
People are trying to take me out, man. People are trying to do things they've been trying since I've been in Waco.
You want to talk to the Waco Police Department again?
No, not them. My faith is so strong, I have been taken over by a higher power. My family is a family of prophets.
You believe yourself to be a prophet?
Much more than that. Much more than that.
Something bothering you, Carlton?
All men should sin, but there is time to repent. Time to repent.
Are you trying to do that now?
I have already been forgiven for any sin I may have committed.
Is there something you want to tell us about the disappearance of your roommate?
No, that's it.
Dotson was driven home by his former high school coach, who could tell that not only was Dotson going through a mental break, but there was something hanging over his head. Just 4 days later, the FBI were called to a hospital in Chestertown, Maryland, to speak with Dotson once more. The group moved to a nearby hotel, where Dotson gave the following account. Him and Patrick wanted to go shooting, so they drove to the Cox's property. Dotson claimed that Dennehy pointed a gun at him and pulled the trigger, but the gun jammed. Dotson claims he said, "Father, please forgive me," and shot back, killing Patrick. Dotson threw his gun in a lake near Dallas and had his uncle help him strip the car, clean it, and get rid of it. The FBI agents on scene even said that it looked like Dotson was full of so much pent-up tension he had to lie down on the bed after confessing. After getting a few maps of the general Waco area, he gave agents an idea of where Patrick would be. That same day, a warrant was drawn up for his arrest.
The court documents say Dennehy was shot in the head by his roommate, Carlton Dotson. Dotson apparently told his cousin that he and Dennehy were arguing prior to the shooting.
It would take Waco police another 4 days until July 25th to uncover the body of Patrick Dennehy, his head separated nearby with 2 bullet wounds. By this time, it had been 36 days since he was reported missing. Once Dennehy's body was discovered, it seemed like all of Baylor's secrets were exhumed to the public. It was around this time that the under-the-table payment rumors at Baylor began to leak out. Sources single out Dennehy's tuition and the Chevy Tahoe he rode around in. Here was the president of Baylor, Robert Sloan, responding to the allegations on Good Morning America.
Looked into that. You know, there is nothing in Coach Bliss's distinguished record to support those kinds of allegations, but on the other hand, we take allegations of this sort very seriously.
Here at Baylor University, a committee is now looking into allegations the school may have given Patrick Dennehy money that was in violation of NCAA rules.
To respond to the media pressure, Baylor established an internal committee led by law professor Bill Underwood. This committee met with Dave Bliss on a daily basis to go over reports and allegations at the time. Bliss started to plant seeds of doubt around Patrick's character right away, telling players on the team he had found rolled up money at Patrick's place while in between committee meetings. It's at this point that Dave Bliss gathered his coaching staff and outlined the issue at hand. He needed a way to prove how Dennehy paid his own tuition. He bragged that he would buy a Cadillac, heck, maybe 4, if someone said they paid Pat's tuition. He settled on the fact that if they could prove that Dennehy and Dotson were drug dealers, they would be in the clear. It is believed that the new assistant, Abar Rouse, did want to go along with the story, and when he expressed so, Bliss left his contract on his desk with a clause highlighted that the head coach has the power to hire and fire staff within the program. Abar Rouse said that with the involvement of a murder investigation going on and the serious nature of the allegations, he knew he had to protect himself. He decided to buy a $25 recording device and mic'd himself up underneath his shirt. On July 30th, the first day of the recordings began. This would be the end of Dave Bliss's NCAA career.
The questions aren't about Pat, and they aren't about Dotson. They're about me, my coaches, and our basketball program.
The full extent of the recordings can be found in the 2017 Showtime documentary on the subject, but I've organized the most relevant here. Bliss comes off as cold, conniving, and spineless as he essentially lays out his plan in just a minute.
There's nobody right now that can say that we paid Pat Dennehy. He's earned it, he's dead. Okay? So what we have to do is create the reasonable doubt. I got like 30 years, I've never talked to the NCAA. Okay, so, I mean, that stands for something. Yes. And the thing about it is what the lawyers want to do is all they got to handle is $2,000 for the down payment. Yes. And then like $7,000 tuition. What we got to create here, drugs.
The plan hinged on getting 3 players to back up Bliss's story with their own account. It was R.T. Gwynn, Ellis Kidd Jr., and Harvey Thomas. It's not hard to understand why these players felt compelled to say something, as the pressure came from Bliss, the sole determiner of their athletic future.
And this one time I went out there, okay? This was like the middle of May, and we were up there and we're getting ready to do some shit, and Pat walks in with a tray. All of a sudden on this tray, I noticed some new shit, okay? The pills was like all kinds of wild shit. They put the tray down, okay? Yeah. When they put the tray down, and Patrick said something like, we're going to have some fun tonight, and we're going to let the other guys pay for it. And he brings out his roll of $100 bills.
One recording highlights a crucial statement by Bliss, where he claims to have lied for Harvey in the past. This ties into a greater theory that Thomas and his cousin Larry Johnson may have had more to do with Patrick's death than initially thought, as we will get to later.
On board? Fuck yeah. That fucking Harvey will throw himself out like a grenade. Okay. Fucker alive when the truth sees him. Okay. Yeah, Harvey. And the reason is because we did it for Harvey. I'm with you. You know, I mean, we stuck up for, that's why we're in this jam. If we stuck up for Harvey, yeah. Okay, I said there's no threats. Yeah. And all those people got pissed at me.
The 3 players would end up testifying to the committee, though it is not known for sure if they also gave statements to the police. Bliss had even let them borrow a tape recorder to practice their statements as he guided them through. Ellis Kidd Jr. was one of the 3 who knew that the story was an obvious exaggeration. Here is the last recording we will go over, where Bliss is telling Ellis that Dennehy can't refute anything because he's dead, and that this information was already known, they just needed someone to back it up. Not only was this a lie, but it's downright ghoulish.
First of all, Dennehy is never going to refute what we say. If we say something about him, then he's dead. So, I mean, he isn't going to argue with me at all. Not to put words in your mouth, but if you just said this single statement, I think it would help. And you can say, I know that the guy was doing some wild shit. Because if we can prove that Dottie and Dennehy were selling drugs, I think we'll be out of the woods.
R.T. Gwynn was the 3rd player that testified, and would later admit that his statement was an outright lie, and that he felt coerced into doing so by Coach Bliss. Bliss would also attempt to record a private conversation with Gwynn and his father at a later point. On August 8th, Bill Underwood spoke to Bliss during one of their daily meetings. He asked Bliss if he could review the coach's bank statements. Bliss asked to have the room alone with Bill, his old friend. With nowhere to hide or further lie to be told, Dave Bliss finally came clean. That same day, August 8th, Dave Bliss would call a press conference and announce his resignation.
I've resigned Baylor University effective immediately. I was made aware of some situations within our program. Rules were broken.
With Abar's recordings yet to leak, the media only knew of Bliss's improprieties with player tuition and recruiting tactics, but the lying and coercion was soon to be revealed.
Operate fully as the inquiry continues, do what I can to make things right. Thank you.
August 8th also happened to be one day after a memorial service for Patrick Dennehy, which Bliss attended, tears in eyes. Baylor would attempt to pick up the pieces with a young coach, Scott Drew, despite the NCAA allowing their players to transfer without any penalty if they decided. 6 players decided to hang around, including Harvey Thomas. While Thomas was playing his first season with the Bears, Dotson was waiting to be seen by a judge to determine whether or not he was mentally fit to stand trial. He was inevitably sent to a mental health facility with the chance to stand trial in the future. The psychiatrist assigned to the trial claimed that he believed himself to be Jesus and that people were trying to kill him. After apparently being stabilized with the help of antipsychotics, he was ruled fit to stand trial in 2005. Psychologists at the facility believed the voices and hallucinations Dotson was describing to be suspect. Had Dotson's erratic behavior been an act to avoid sentencing? It seems extremely unlikely. 5 days before his murder trial was set to begin, Dotson would plead guilty to the murder of Patrick Dennehy on June 15, 2003, in what's believed to be 2 years from the date Dennehy was murdered. Dotson was sentenced to 35 years in prison. As of early 2024, Dotson had been denied parole 4 times. At the time of making this video, he's awaiting the decision on his 5th request. Abar Rouse would use the recordings to his defense, and by some means or another, they leaked to the public. He has claimed that his attorney leaked them, and the journalist who published the recordings has evidently backed up this claim. He would file a $1.5 million lawsuit against his lawyer, but it's difficult to find a ruling on the matter. Abar's career was effectively derailed after the incident, arguably more so than Bliss or any other of the assistants. College basketball is a fraternal-like system, and what Rouse did is considered outside of the code by these coaches.
If one of my assistants would tape every one of our conversations with me not knowing it, there's no way he would be on my staff.
He didn't do the right thing. The right thing would have been to stand up in the meeting and tell the head coach, I'm not going for this.
Abar wasn't able to find luck in high-level coaching and ended up becoming a correctional officer in 2009, before eventually working his way up to being a teacher at FMC Carswell, a federal state prison. Harvey Thomas would find himself at a strange impasse after the dust settled. He remained at Baylor for a sole season before heading overseas to play professionally in Poland. His career arguably peaked when he had a brief stint in the NBA D-League in 2005. Thomas would ultimately pass all of the lie detectors administered to him, but they also had a confirmed report that he was behind the threat to Dotson and Dennehy. In fact, the official police report claims that Harvey was acting with his cousin Larry Johnson, who seemed to slip between the cracks of both the police and NCAA investigators. The 2017 Showtime documentary implies that Thomas's cousin Larry Johnson may have been involved, as he left town suspiciously quick after the disappearance of Patrick, and Baylor's staff bought him a ticket home to Virginia. There's a definite sense that Harvey, Bliss, and Johnson know more to the story than they're leading on, but at this point, it's only speculation. Like a weed growing through pavement, Bliss would find a way back into basketball after his resignation. He would coach the 2005-2006 Dakota Wizards of the CBA, the same franchise that would eventually become the Santa Cruz Warriors. He would only last a year before resigning, on a season where he went 19-29 and saw an 8-game losing streak. His next stop was Allen Academy in 2010, the oldest private school in Texas, where he would seem to bump into institutional control issues once again. Bliss was found guilty of forging the signature of his boss, illegally recruiting 2 players, and then attempting to play both players who were ineligible. Facing a lengthy ban from the Texas Association of Private and Parochial Schools, they instead decided to join the Texas Christian Athletic League. TAPS would cite institutional control issues in their memorandum on the matter, the same citation Bliss received at SMU and later at Baylor. Bliss jumped back into the college ranks in 2015, coaching Southwest Christian University, an NAIA team in Bethany, Oklahoma. He would lead the team to 40-28 in 2 seasons, but ultimately resigned after the airing of the 2017 Showtime documentary. I guess some people just needed a little reminder. The doc would paint Bliss in a considerably poor light, and well-deservedly so. He came off as smug and self-righteous when he defended his actions from 2003, and hearing him talk for 2 minutes, you can tell that he feels little to no remorse. The documentary would use a similar technique that filmmakers used during HBO's The Jinx, and that police investigators used on Dotson. In between questions, they left cameras rolling. And would eventually be included in the documentary, Bliss calls Pat the worst, and he alleges that he was for sure a drug dealer, selling to friends on campus. When the filmmaker challenged him on this point and said there is no evidence to corroborate this, Bliss doubled down and said it was from his old friend, Bill Underwood. He would finish his career out in Las Vegas, coaching for the American Prep Academy in 2017, fittingly one of the more corrupt systems in sport. For someone like Bliss, who's familiar with pay-to-play, this likely was nothing new. It seemed like he still hadn't fixed his eligibility issues yet, and as the athletic director, he had to forfeit 2 middle school games because of ineligible players. He would retire in 2019 at the age of 77, with little publicity or fanfare. Baylor's program was hit with considerable sanctions after a 2004 ruling that would last until 2010 and ripple much longer after. Scott Drew, the coach hired directly after Bliss, would finally lead Baylor to their first national championship in 2021.
Coach Drew and Baylor complete college basketball's greatest rebound and rebuild with a championship.
Bliss, on the other hand, would receive no criminal charges despite allegations of extortion, obstruction of justice, and witness tampering all being supported. College basketball is a business, and things can get forgotten quickly when money is involved. It is believed that Dotson was urged to change his plea from not guilty to guilty because his lawyer said a long trial would be bad for Baylor. It is also alleged by Dotson's family that another major reason for the dramatic switch was because it was communicated to him that his lawyers would secure him a plea deal. With his parole currently in review, we may hear from Carlton Dotson sooner than we think. Do you believe that he is guilty and that he acted alone? Some answers to these questions may still be out there. And if you ever see him, it might be a good idea to bring a tape recorder with you.